March 2008. Wall Street is shaking, Bear Stearns is collapsing, and in the middle of the panic, Jamie Dimon looks almost calm. To a lot of people, he's the safe banker, the grown-up in the room, the man Washington can call when things start breaking. But that image hides a harder question. Did Jamie Dimon help save the system, or did he use the wreckage to build something no one could ever really challenge again? Because when one bank touches your savings, your mortgage, your job, and the government itself, this stops being a story about one CEO. To understand how he got there, you have to go back to the moment he got thrown out. Before Jamie Dimon became the face of JP Morgan Chase, he was the sharp young operator standing next to Sandy Weill. Weill was one of the great empire builders of modern finance, and Dimon learned in that world fast. He learned how deals got done, how pressure worked, how executives fought for turf, and how size could solve problems that smaller rivals couldn't survive. He wasn't the star in public yet. He was the one inside the machine, making it run. That mattered, because the version of Dimon people came to know later, blunt, disciplined, obsessed with numbers, didn't appear out of nowhere. It came out of years spent inside merger battles and boardroom politics, where being smart wasn't enough. You had to be tougher than the person across the table, and sometimes tougher than the person sitting beside you. By the 1990s, Weill and Dimon had helped assemble what became Citigroup, one of the biggest financial companies on earth. Dimon rose all the way to president. He looked like the heir. Then it collapsed in a way that still feels personal. In 1998, Sandy Weill pushed him out. Dimon later admitted he went home and told his family he'd been fired. His youngest daughter asked if they'd have to sleep in the streets. They wouldn't, obviously, but the humiliation was real. He'd spent years helping build a giant and got removed before he could run it. That kind of ending leaves a mark. Looking back, this was the real turning point. Not because he lost money, because he lost his place. For a while, Dimon was out of the center of power. Then Bank One called. The Chicago bank was struggling, badly managed, and losing credibility. Dimon took over as CEO in 2000 and did what he'd become known for. He cut costs. He sold weak businesses. He fired thousands of employees. He stripped away executive perks. None of that made him lovable. It made him effective. And here's the interesting thing. Bank One wasn't just a comeback. It was where his governing instinct got harder. Survival came first. Liquidity mattered. Capital mattered. You couldn't count on markets staying friendly. And you definitely couldn't count on loyalty at the top. Years later, he'd call it a fortress balance sheet. At Bank One, it was less a slogan than a scar. So by the time JP Morgan Chase came calling in 2004, Dimon wasn't just a talented banker looking for redemption. He was something more dangerous. A man who'd learned that caution and conquest could live inside the same strategy. When JP Morgan Chase agreed to merge with Bank One in 2004, Dimon finally got what exile had been building toward: entry into one of the grand names of American banking. Not long after, he moved into the top job, first as president and chief operating officer, then chief executive. This wasn't some quiet handoff. He arrived with a reputation, and he ran the place like someone who never wanted to be surprised again. Inside the bank, people felt that shift fast. Dimon pushed for tighter reporting lines. He wanted cleaner numbers, faster answers, fewer layers between a problem and the person responsible for it. Meetings got tougher. Excuses didn't travel far. He expected managers to know their businesses in detail, and if they didn't, he noticed. Think about it. JP Morgan wasn't some small turnaround anymore. It was already a sprawling financial machine. Tightening control over something that large meant changing how power moved inside it. Outwardly, the message was simple. JP Morgan was stronger than the pack, better capitalized, more disciplined, less intoxicated by whatever easy money trade had captured Wall Street that quarter. Dimon spoke plainly, and that helped. Investors liked the confidence. Regulators liked that he seemed to understand risk without pretending risk could disappear. He came off like a banker who still believed banking should involve limits. That image carried weight because the timing was perfect. In the middle of the 2000s, plenty of rivals were chasing the housing boom harder, stuffing themselves with mortgage exposure and exotic products tied to it. Dimon did warn shareholders in 2007 that JP Morgan was seeing problems in subprime mortgages. That gave him something rare on Wall Street: credibility before the crash fully hit. He looked early. He looked prepared. And once markets started to wobble, that reputation turned into power. But while the image was caution, the institution kept expanding. JP Morgan wasn't shrinking into some humble, low-risk utility. It was growing across consumer banking, credit cards, investment banking, trading, corporate lending, and the systems big companies used every day. Size kept spreading through the bank, even as Dimon sold that size as a form of safety. That's the tension that matters here. A bank can be managed better than its rivals and still become so large that its own stability starts to matter more than everyone else's. Few people realize how much trust changes behavior before a crisis even begins. If markets, clients, and officials believe one bank is safer, money moves there faster. Influence moves there too. The bigger it gets, the harder it is for anyone in government to picture letting it stumble, because too much else is attached to it. So before the housing bubble fully burst, the conditions were already in place. Dimon had discipline, credibility, and a bank with reach in nearly every direction that mattered. Then the mortgage market cracked open, panic spread across Wall Street, and caution stopped being just a defense. It became a chance to buy. In March 2008, Bear Stearns was running out of time. Confidence had drained away, funding was disappearing, and the firm that had once looked untouchable was suddenly close to collapse. That kind of failure wasn't just about one company. Bear sat deep inside the machinery of Wall Street, tied into trading, lending, and counterparty relationships all over the system. If it went down in a chaotic way, officials feared the damage could spread fast, so the calls started. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson and the Federal Reserve needed a buyer. Not a week later, right now, JP Morgan was one of the few banks strong enough to even consider it, and Dimon understood exactly what that meant. Publicly, the move could be framed as service, stepping in when the system needed help. Privately, it opened a door that normal conditions never would have. The first deal priced Bear at $2 a share, later raised to $10 after outrage from shareholders. Even then, the price looked brutal compared with where Bear had traded before panic took over. The Fed also agreed to support a portfolio of Bear assets through a special arrangement that reduced JP Morgan's downside. That's the part people often blur. This wasn't some ordinary takeover in a healthy market. It was an emergency transfer, shaped by fear and backed by the state. Dimon later described the deal as something JP Morgan did because it was asked to help stabilize the system. That may be true, but it also brought traders, prime brokerage relationships, and a broader reach into markets that matter a lot when you're trying to become the central bank's favorite private sector problem solver. Two things can be true at once. A rescue can also be a bargain. A public service can also expand private power. Then the year got even darker. Lehman Brothers failed in September. Credit markets froze. Money funds shook. Across the country, regular people were already living inside the disaster. Jobs vanished. Retirement accounts dropped. Foreclosures tore through neighborhoods. Families who had nothing to do with structured finance still paid for it in the most direct way possible. Through lost homes, lost work, and fear that kept spreading. And in that same month, another giant landed on the table. Washington Mutual, a huge savings and loan with a massive branch network, collapsed and was seized by regulators. The FDIC ran a process, and JP Morgan won. The price, about $1.9 billion. In return, it gained a giant deposit base and a much bigger consumer footprint, especially in places where it had wanted to grow: California, Florida, Washington State. The map changed overnight. What made everything change wasn't only that JP Morgan survived while others broke. It was that survival led it shop. When panic empties the field, the strongest buyer doesn't just endure the storm, it writes the next version of the market. Few people realize how one-sided that can become. The crisis didn't scatter power away from Wall Street's biggest names. It pushed more of it toward the firms strong enough and trusted enough to keep buying while everyone else drowned. That's the real split between the story people tell and the way the system actually moved. The myth says 2008 punished excess. In part it did. Firms disappeared, executives fell. Shareholders got crushed, but the mechanism underneath pointed another way. Some institutions became more central because the government, the market, and corporate clients needed someone standing when the smoke cleared. Dimon saw that faster than almost anyone. By the time the worst panic passed, JP Morgan hadn't just protected itself. It had absorbed broken rivals, expanded its deposit base, widened its market reach, and deepened the belief that when things truly go bad, this is one of the banks Washington leans on. That belief carries value all by itself. It lowers fear, attracts clients, and pulls in business. It makes a giant feel even harder to replace. And once a bank reaches that point, the problem changes. The question isn't whether it can screw up. Any bank can. The question is who pays when the giant at the center gets it wrong. After the crisis, Jamie Dimon's status changed. He wasn't just the head of a big bank anymore. He became the banker other people pointed to when they wanted an adult in the room. He testified before Congress. He gave blunt interviews. He warned about policy mistakes, mocked bad ideas, and talked like someone who understood both markets and the wiring behind them. Even other bank CEOs often let him take the lead in public. You can see how that happened. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? He had survived the collapse with his job, his reputation, and a larger bank. That image held for a while. Then 2012 hit. Inside JP Morgan, a trader in the bank's chief investment office had built positions so large and so awkward that they started distorting the market around them. The person at the center became known as the London Whale. At first, Dimon brushed the issue aside. He called it a tempest in a teapot. That line aged badly, fast. The losses grew into more than $6 billion, and what had looked like a contained problem turned into a very public failure of oversight, judgment, and control. The damage wasn't just financial. It cut straight into the identity Dimon had built. This was the man who sold caution as culture, the manager who pushed discipline so hard that people inside the bank felt it in meetings, in reporting lines, in the way numbers had to be defended. Yet here was a huge trading loss sitting inside a unit that was supposed to be managing risk, not creating fresh danger. Imagine being in their shoes, hearing the safest big bank in America explain that one of its own internal hedges had turned into a disaster no one seemed able to stop in time. Dimon later admitted the trade was flawed, complex, poorly reviewed, poorly executed, and poorly monitored. That mattered because it was direct, and because it exposed something bigger than one mistake. Size doesn't remove fragility. Sometimes it hides it. The more complex the institution gets, the easier it becomes for risk to travel under labels that sound boring, technical, even responsible. Few people realize that this is where concentrated finance gets slippery. Trouble doesn't always arrive wearing a villain's mask. Sometimes it walks in carrying a spreadsheet and the word hedge. And the London Whale wasn't some lonely exception floating in an otherwise spotless record. Over the years, JP Morgan paid wave after wave of fines and settlements tied to mortgage practices, market misconduct, and compliance failures. Different cases, different departments, different years. But the pattern kept returning. The bank was strong enough to absorb punishment that might have broken smaller rivals, and central enough that punishment rarely threatened the people at the very top. That's the part that sticks. Shareholders took hits. The bank wrote checks. Politicians scolded. Headlines burned hot for a week. Then another scandal somewhere else pulled attention away. Through all of it, Dimon stayed. His standing dipped, then recovered. The institution bent, but it didn't lose its place. Why? Because by then, JP Morgan sat too deep inside the daily movement of money. It mattered in corporate lending, bond markets, consumer banking, payment flows, and the boring but serious plumbing that keeps treasury markets and big business functioning. Regulators could punish it. They could demand more controls, more reporting, more capital. But breaking it apart or forcing some dramatic retreat carried a risk officials never seemed eager to test. So there's the irony. The executive praised for understanding danger better than his peers ended up leading the clearest example of how dangerous concentration itself can become. Not because JP Morgan collapsed, because it didn't. Because every time it stumbled, the country had to keep moving around it. And once a company reaches that kind of position, it stops feeling like just another company. It starts to look like part of the operating system. That's where Jamie Dimon's power stops looking like ordinary corporate power and starts looking like something wider. JP Morgan isn't just a bank where people park cash. It sits inside checking accounts, savings accounts, mortgages, credit cards, auto loans, wealth management, corporate lending, bond underwriting, and the payment systems companies use to meet payroll and move money across borders. If you work for a major company, there's a decent chance JP Morgan touches your life even if you've never walked into a Chase branch. That reach matters because control in finance isn't only about profit, it's about position. A company can be rich and still replaceable. JP Morgan is harder to replace because it helps carry out the boring daily tasks that keep the economy moving. Big companies need banks that can hold huge deposits, clear transactions, arrange financing, sell debt, manage risk, and operate across dozens of countries at once. Governments need banks to help sell bonds and manage huge flows of money. Investors need counterparties they trust in stressed markets. Small businesses need credit lines and payment services that keep the lights on. So the bank becomes less like a participant and more like part of the backdrop. Dimon understands that, and he talks like someone who knows his audience stretches far beyond shareholders. Over the years, he's turned into a regular public voice on recession risk, inflation, regulation, trade, geopolitics, even the future of American power. Presidents meet with him. Treasury officials call him. Reporters chase his views like they're polling a finance minister, not a private executive whose first duty is still to his own institution. And here's the interesting thing. He often speaks in a way that makes that role feel natural, blunt, direct, slightly impatient, like he's cutting through nonsense while everyone else is busy performing. That style helps him. It makes concentrated power sound like competence. If the person speaking seems informed, practical, and less ideological than the people around him, the public starts to accept the idea that he should have unusual access. Few people realize how much influence works like that. Not through secrecy alone, but through familiarity. Jamie Dimon becomes the guy who's always in the room, always on the call, always treated as someone whose judgment the country might need. You can see the danger. When one executive gets this much credibility, accountability starts thinning out. Not because laws disappear, and not because critics vanish, but because the costs of pushing back look bigger every year. If regulators come down too hard on a bank this connected, they don't just punish a company. They risk disrupting credit, markets, payroll systems, corporate financing, and confidence more broadly. So scale becomes its own shield. The larger the institution, the more any serious threat to it can be framed as a threat to everyone else. That creates a strange kind of trap. Officials are supposed to police concentrated private power, but they also depend on the stability of the same institutions they might want to restrain. So the argument keeps circling back to management. Is the bank well run? Is the CEO smart? Is this better than the alternative? Those aren't crazy questions, but they're smaller questions than the one the country should probably ask. What happens when the system grows so dependent on one private company that breaking its dominance starts to feel impossible? By this point, Jamie Dimon's win looks bigger than a career triumph. He didn't just build a successful bank, he ended up near the center of how money moves, how business gets funded, and how financial stress gets managed in America. So the issue isn't simply whether he beat his rivals. The issue is what exactly he now gets to stand on top of. Jamie Dimon didn't invent modern finance. He didn't create deregulation, housing mania, or the long drift towards bigger and bigger banks. But he read the system better than almost anyone inside it. And when the break came, he played it with a level of discipline most rivals didn't have. That's why the case for him is easy to understand. Supporters look at the wreckage of 2008. Look at who stayed standing, and decide competence still matters. In their view, Dimon ran a stronger bank, took risk more seriously than others, and stepped in when the country needed a private institution sturdy enough to absorb blows. That argument has force because some of it is plainly true. JP Morgan did come through the crisis in better shape than several rivals. Dimon did warn about mortgage trouble earlier than some others. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? He did build a reputation for knowing the details and pushing hard on weak management. If your choice is between a careful executive and a reckless one, the answer isn't hard. But critics aren't really arguing for recklessness versus care. They're arguing that the whole setup rewards concentration, then calls the winner responsible for surviving it. From that angle, Dimon's story looks less like a civic rescue and more like a masterclass in using emergency to gather more ground. The rescues brought gains. The later scandals showed that even the best managed giant can still spill risk outward. The influence he built in Washington and in boardrooms across the country means the consequences of his choices don't stay private for long. Both readings live side by side, and that's what makes him so slippery. He's not easy to flatten into a villain because he is skilled, prepared, and often sharper than the people criticizing him. He's not easy to celebrate cleanly either, because the bank he leads keeps showing how unstable private power can look once it reaches this scale. Imagine being in their shoes, trying to decide whether the country is safer because one bank is this strong, or less safe because so much depends on that strength holding. So maybe Jamie Dimon matters most as a symbol. Not of corruption in the cartoon sense, and not of genius floating above the mess, but of a country that keeps treating size as reassurance. A country that rescues concentration, depends on concentration, then acts surprised when concentrated power starts shaping public life without ever asking for a vote. If the system now leans on one bank to stay steady, then the question isn't just how powerful Jamie Dimon became. It's who we handed that power to in the first place. So Jamie Dimon doesn't land as a simple hero or villain. He looks more like the purest version of modern American finance. Disciplined, trusted, deeply embedded, and so large that failure stops feeling private. That's why the question stays uncomfortable. Power at this level doesn't need a ballot to shape the country. If you want more stories about the people and companies steering the world behind closed doors, subscribe now. And if you think no banker should hold this much sway over public life, send this video to someone who still believes Wall Street paid for what it broke.